Hello and welcome to the live stream tonight. Tonight is going to be the week 7 recap for those of you that are watching this later. And we are going to cover some of the assignments that were turned in by participants in the Facebook group. If you didn't see the video on what week 7 was about, it was all about variable reluctance sensors, most commonly used for crank sensors, cam sensors, sometimes ABS sensors, and vehicle speed sensors. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. We got a bunch of guys joining us. We got Bart, Kuba, Michael Mack, Joshua Myers, Paul Smith. We got Valerie, and she is mic'd up tonight.
Was that my cue to say hello?
Yeah.
Hello.
That way she doesn't have to yell across the room. Hey, PJ, what's going on? We got George Bonney as well. I'm not sure if I said your name or not. Jason Chavez. If I missed you, I'm sorry. Just trying to scroll it through here. Angel Garcia, Daryl. We have some some new members. Welcome, Karsten from Copenhagen. 3:30. Is that a.m. or in the afternoon? So I have a quick question for you guys. Did anybody recognize the scope that was on the intro screen? I'll pull it up here again. Give me 1 second. But just curious if anyone has seen that scope before. You really can't see it there. So I have the name blocked out, but you might be able to tell by the color of the scope. Daryl probably knows this one.
Are we guessing the scope or the person that's scoping?
The scope.
Okay, I was trying to look for a reflection.
Trying to look for.
I'm getting really good at knowing people by their reflections.
Daryl says the verdict. Angel Snappy something? Yep, it is from the verdict. This is the old 2-channel wireless scope that came with the old Windows XP verdict scan tool. So I actually bought one of the verdict scan tools used. I think I paid like $500 for it, but it didn't come with this meter. And I really wish it would have because it's kind of cool. I picked this one up, in the last 6 months or so and finally got a battery for it. So now I can use it as well. But it has its own display, or you can connect it wirelessly to the Snap-on diagnostic platform as long as it's Windows based. And I'll have some more of this in the future. So let's jump in here. I gotta refresh my Facebook page because I'm sure that there is a few submissions since I activated this a minute ago. Give me 1 second here. And how is everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good holiday. If you worked Friday, hopefully it wasn't too bad, or at least it was profitable and you didn't get all the tourists heading back out of town. I think here we go. I appreciate that, Jason. I am trying. I'm hoping that I can keep this momentum going and keep some good lessons in the future. I have a few lined out for sure, but I want to try and keep them, building on each other and not just shooting aimlessly around the scope realm. That's Kevin's week 6. I think that was where we finished up his grand finale from last week. And then I'll start off with, I mentioned in the video last week that wheel speed sensors are going to be a VR sensor. And Randall, of course, the first vehicle he checked was not. And it's actually a square wave. So not all vehicle speed sensors are a VR sensor. When I look back through the repair information, Chevrolet switched it around 2003 or 4 on some models, and then by 2005, most of their vehicles went to a square wave pattern. So I was a little wrong on the video. Bart Young, week 7 VR sensor, U-scope with cursors active. And this was bench testing a pickup coil from a 1978 GMC HEI distributor, spinning it by hand. And I believe he said, yeah, delta here of 19.6 volts. So that seems like a very good sensor amplitude if you're just spinning that over by hand. Spinning it over by hand may be a little faster than cranking it over, but that seems like a pretty good pickup. Bart, did that one when you reinstalled it? Did it work? Because you said that this was out for some other repairs. I'm assuming with a signal like that it worked properly. Nick, this was his first post. I don't think he understood fully that we were doing each weekly assignment, but he did get a post up. But it was secondary capture and some amperage stuff going on. Then we have Doug Wilson's first post. I think Doug has a couple of them in here. Ford Focus, 2.0 liter crank sensor at idle, and then with an increase in RPM. He added measurements at 2 points and did a frequency plot to show the increase in RPM. Now, when I open this up, I'm curious to see if this Ford sits at the 0 mark or if it has a bias voltage. A lot of the Fords will actually sit above 0. They'll sit at like 1.5 to 2 volts, and they'll alternate from that point. And that's what this one is doing. We see the lowest point of his waveform kind of right here when it was idling was just below 0, and it kind of sits around 2.5, and the center is probably around 1.25 volts. So he has his cursors on here. He has 2 rotations of the engine. We can tell that because there's a missing tooth on most crank trigger wheels, and that engine has to spin over twice if it's a 4-cycle engine. So he has a complete cycle, which is 720 degrees of this combustion. So he's got his cursors there, and then he used frequency to plot out the RPM. Or maybe ATS does this on its own, but 3,300 RPM at this point. And we can see a little bit of distortion in the signal, but apparently it's not enough to, get the computer concerned about it. And then here's where he plotted the frequency. Must be a math channel built into the ATS scope. Frequency channel with these little dropouts right here. Those are indications of that missing tooth because it sees that as a bigger gap and a frequency drop. So if you're concerned about that, that's normal on most captures if you do a frequency plot. And then we do a snap throttle here, and makes a nice wavy line. So no major dropouts other than the missing tooth. Sometimes this is a good test because if a sensor doesn't work at higher RPMs, you'll see glitches up in this area where you normally wouldn't if it's a good sensor. And then Doug put some information about that sensor, and it has 35 teeth, and there's a missing tooth on it, 1.5 volt bias signal, which is about what we saw on the screen. So good job, Doug. Always including excellent information. Mm-hmm. That's a video. I don't know if the video will play if I click on it with Doug, but he shows how to do a timing measurement. So if you're interested in that, it's in the Facebook group. I think last time I tried clicking on one, it got all weird, and there's no audio coming from it anyways. And then here is another one from Doug. Ford Escape. Doug's working on a lot of Subarus and a lot of Fords, and he has multiple things going on here. So let me read it for you. Yellow trace is going to be his VR sensor, the crank sensor. Blue is primary ignition on cylinder 1. And he plots a 6-cylinder pattern in 720 degree events, 2 rotations of the crank, 1 of the cam. So he's got multiple captures going on here. And he's flexing that scope a little bit, showing off what it can do, making some of us jealous at the extra features. PCM on the Ford Escape is really easy to access. So if you're doing some back probing, you can jump right in here. You don't have to dig for the sensor. And just a word of advice from one that I fought. If you have one of these that is setting injector circuit codes or ignition coil circuit codes, and everything is good to go, and you're not getting a good signal to the ignition coil or injector, about 6 inches down this wiring harness, they like to break the wires right in there. After I found the first one, I had 2 or 3 come in after that with broken wires. Yeah, we have plenty of banter back and forth in the group, which is entertaining. So here we have a crank sensor, and this one, we don't have the voltage measurement for channel A on here, but I bet you this one sits around that 1.5 volt as well. And then we have our cam sensors up here and our ignition trace. So crank sensor looks good, a good VR pattern, and then this one looks like it has Hall effect sensors for the camshaft sensors. And there's a zoom in on that missing tooth.
Did you see Angel's question?
No?
Silly question, but frequency plot is kind of like a math channel.
I believe so, Angel. I think Doug will probably be able to answer that for you. But in Picoscope, I would have to go into a math channel and add a frequency plot, or go up to the top and where it says AC/DC, select frequency from there. But I don't always use that one. I prefer to use a math channel so I can see my original waveform plus the math channel. I'm guessing that the ATS scope has it built in where you can just hit that frequency plot and pick your channel, and it'll give you that graph. We have Josh Myers with a 2012 Kia Soul with a 2-liter. We have crank and injector control. So VR sensor. So even 2012, they're continuing to use the variable reluctance crank sensor. They worked for years and years. Why change now? It's a very simple design, very inexpensive to manufacture, and puts out good results. So, Josh, I just got a recall notice. Actually, my parents did, for that Hyundai. Was that a Tiburon? Whatever that car was that we had with the bad engine. Wasn't a Tiburon. You know which one I'm talking about. The one we did a live stream, live diag on. We just got a recall notice for an updated programming because pre-ignition could cause engine failure. I'm guessing that's the Veloster. I'm guessing that's what that could have been one of the problems that blew up my engine. Let me see here. Michael Mack, week 7, we have cam and crank on a 03 Toyota Camry using the Autel. Now, there's a few questions on the Autel this week, and I booted up the Autel on my brother's computer, and I couldn't figure it out. And it was to do with inverting waveforms. The only way you can invert the waveforms is with a math channel, apparently. So you can't watch live data inverted, which I don't like for secondary ignition. I like to see the inverted pattern. So we have a nice VR sensor signal. It looks like it's hovering around 0 volts there. This one is also around 0 volts. So I think Ford is the biggest one that uses the bias voltage on this sensor. Everyone else kind of hovers around 0. And then he shows us where he connected here. Thank you for that one, Michael. And then Brian Mann posted one up. This will be for the week 6 when we had the Hall effect sensor waveform. So this one had Hall effect crank, Hall effect cam, and then he also has injector and ignition sync. This one he was getting a code for, I believe for the crank sensor, P0335. I can't remember if that's cam or crank. And then John Webb, VR cam sensor on an 03 Toyota Tacoma at idle, back probe at the sensor, pin 1 and 2, which is NE negative and G2. And he's using the Snap-on Triton D8 because his Modus is still getting the screen fixed. The 3.4 liter engine is great for cam and crank sensor signals. They're so easy to access. So we have a nice cam sensor signal. That only has one tooth on that cam sensor, or on the cam sprocket. So we're only going to see one tooth per revolution of the camshaft. And he shows where he connected here. So he's got his ground connected to the camshaft sensor as well, which gives you a little cleaner signal, a little more amplitude. But if you're doing multiple sensors at the same time, then you're going to want to move that ground over to the engine block or the battery. Oh, it's only for the 1.6 liter engines. I can't remember what I have. Um, yeah, maybe I'm hoping this winter I can get a new engine for that car. It's just I've been so busy. Even if we get an engine, we won't have time to install it. Angel Garcia, 2013 Ford Fusion 3 liter. Zoomed out and zoomed in. So here's a zoomed in capture. We see our missing tooth, all of our teeth here. Now, if you guys notice this slight variance on the outer edge of the waveform, that's from the engine speed fluctuation. So each time it dips, it's a cylinder coming up on compression, and then you get your firing event, and it accelerates. So that's why you get those bumps in it. And it's a lot more pronounced when you're cranking the engine over than when it's actually running. And then we can see it a little bit here, this kind of tidal wave thing going on. That's each cylinder speeding up and slowing down. Thank you for that one, Angel. Paul Smith had one. I'll look at the notes here. Honda Accord 2002, crank sensor. So he has a math channel built in here as well. Now this is what happens if you have a math channel on a sensor that doesn't have a high resolution sensor with like one missing tooth. If it has like a mismatch of teeth, like 4 and then a space and then 4 and then a space, your math channel will look kind of funky. Subarus are with the older like 7-tooth crank sprocket. Those are like impossible to do a math channel on. It just doesn't work. There's not enough teeth there to give you a good reading. The ones that have the higher tooth count will give you an okay reading. Okay, thanks for that, Josh. And then Jason Chavez. Now we'll see if we can see his reflection in this one. This is Valerie's got her eyes focused in here. Yellow trace is the crank sensor signal. We're working on a 2009 Subi single overhead cam. Now this isn't yours, is it? I thought yours was a different year. But our yellow is crank, green is cam on bank 2. Because they don't have a cam sensor on bank 1. And then blue trace is ignition firing on cylinder 1. Daryl and Kevin helped them plot out everything, 700 degree mark. Because on some, for me, my eye is not trained to pick them out automatically. So they suggested adding in that ignition event, since he has the extra channels available on his scope, to help him identify the 720 degree rotations. So we have a 0 mark here, and this one is kind of an oddball one as well. Even though it has a higher resolution crank trigger, there is a missing tooth here, and then we have a weird double missing tooth there, and then another missing tooth here. That's the 360 mark. We see our double event there, and then a single again, and that's 720. So 2 rotations of the crankshaft, and I can see why this pattern would throw you off, Jason, because it's super strange to see a pattern like that with an odd number of missing teeth. So the ignition sync definitely helps with that. And then we have 360 degrees of the camshaft over here as well, and we have a waste fire ignition system. So we're going to see that ignition system fire every rotation of the crankshaft or every half rotation of the camshaft. And here's a little more zoomed in without the annotation.
Are you zooming in over the setup tab?
Oh.
Kevin's yelling at you to do that.
Okay. I see it now. Let me.
I see.
I gotta open this in a new tab. Okay, it's only gonna give me 500%. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but under the frequency plot, Jason Chavez needs his glasses. Yeah, great choice on the color there because it blends right in like it's supposed to be part of the screen. But if we zoom in, I think, is Jason wearing glasses in this? I don't know if they're actual glasses or safety glasses. And those of you that are new here, it's a running joke that Jason needs to put his glasses back on. Oh, now we can see some glasses frames. We're good to go this week. You guys are good sports. Uh, Jeff, Jake Seth, Jeff Sake, Jake Seth. Week 7 VR cam sensor signal. We have another first gen Tacoma. Thanks to John Webb for letting him use this one. And let me open this one up. So we have the Vantage Legend. I kind of wouldn't mind having one of these to update our current Vantage, but there's really no need because we have like 5 other Snap-on lab scopes available. I just like this has like the Motus screen, and I just kind of like that better than what we have on our older one. But we have that single trigger once again on that passenger side, which is bank 1 camshaft sprocket. Thank you, Jake. Stuart, we have a 1997 Mazda 626 with a 2-liter engine, and this is the crankshaft sensor. So Mazda's built heavily on the Ford design. So if we look at this, we are biased up a little bit. This one almost looks like we're at 2 volts. And he said this one's actually a 3-wire sensor, but it's still a VR sensor. Huh. I didn't know they made a 3-wire sensor. I wonder if they're using that extra terminal as a shield ground or something. But nice waveform. We see the missing teeth. I haven't seen any so far that are lacking the missing tooth. I don't think anyone posted one for like an Audi. We need like a 96 Audi 2.8 for the engine speed sensor, because it reads off of the ring gear. Oh, this was Doug Wilson made a post, but it disappeared. It did return finally. But Kevin said that he took the wrong pill and it disappeared into the matrix. Now, Chad Humphreys posted a image here. This is going back a few weeks. He did multiple tests. But the USB Autoscope 4. Now, this is an interesting scope, and I want to talk about this one for a second. Okay. Hans says that there's a lot of Volkswagen crank sensors that are 3-wire and have a shielded ground. Well, they can't have a missing flywheel tooth. At least I don't think so. I mean, you would think it would make noise when you turned it over. I had, the only reason I know that is because I had one of those cars, and I bought it blown up. The engine was bad, and then the tranny was bad, and I finally got enough pieces to put it together, and it wouldn't rev past 2,500 RPM, and it kept setting a crank sensor code, and I finally scoped it, and the signal was really bad, and the ring gear, the teeth of the ring gear were worn really, really thin, and they were like little knife edges, and it wasn't enough for that crank sensor to pick it up. So I had to get I put a used flywheel in it at the time because the new one's like $800. I got a used one for like $100 and didn't machine it or anything because you can't machine it because it's dual mass. Put it together and it was fine for quite a while. So the USB Autoscope 4, it does a battery test, starting test, compression test, and alternator test. Now, I kind of like this. The Pico scope has the Pico diagnostics software, but it comes and goes, like which revision is working good and which one's not. I've had enough issues where I haven't even opened it on my laptop since I reinstalled the software. But it shows compression of each cylinder in a percentage here. It shows his cold cranking amps, the battery voltage under load, the amperage. So lots of information here on the starting system test. And then it gives I'll have to open this in another window here. Zoom in a little bit, or zoom out, and then zoom back in. So as you crank the engine over repeatedly, over and over again, it stacks up each cylinder on here. So that way you know that, like, okay, one time I had a little bit lower compression in a cylinder. Was that just, the initial rotation? Was it always low? So it stacks it up here. Like this cylinder here started out with lower compression, and then the more revolutions we did, it built up a little bit. And that could be indications of stuff that, is that cylinder washed out with a little bit of fuel, and as we cranked it up, it built a little compression. If we see one that's high and then low and high and then low, maybe we have a valve sealing issue. So I think that this scope has a lot of potential, and I'm interested to see more about this scope. And then he has some ignition captures. We have our VR sensor test, our Hall effect sensor test, and here's one with more Hall effect. And the relative compression with the sync. So he turned in a whole bunch of homework all at once to get caught up, but definitely interested in that scope. Yeah, I don't think this. I'm going back to Hans. I don't think that my Audi had an extra reluctor on there, and that sensor was only, it had additional crank sensor on the side of the block, but I believe it only used that sensor for misfire detection, and they just called it like the engine speed sensor. It's been a few years since that one came up. And then here was one Doug Wilson fought. This was on the 2010 Subaru Forester. He had an issue where he was connected. He had the scope lead grounded, I believe. He was connected to the camshaft or crankshaft sensor, but when he connected, he wasn't getting a good signal. And whenever he connected to the camshaft sensor, the vehicle would stall. So it was actually grounding out the sensor through the scope, and it wasn't until he reversed the leads on the snap-on that he realized that the wiring diagram was incorrect. I think Kevin helped him with this one as well. For some reason, Subaru flip-flops the wiring color halfway through the harness. So I don't think you guys will get the sound from this one, but this is the signal kind of all messed up, and all he's going to do is flip-flop the leads, and the waveforms will correct themselves. So it's kind of like cross-talking through the cables or through the scope. Kind of a weird scenario. So this is when he flip-flopped his leads because the wiring was wrong. So, if you don't have the right waveform, sometimes it's a good idea to check that other wire. And Q says, I'm interested in the scope from Rotkey. It's a USB autoscope. They're on back order, and did she say it was from Russia? I think I've read that here.
Ukraine?
Ukraine. But Hans says the Danish way. I'm not sure if that refers to the scope or
How you pronounce his name?
Hans.
No, I'm not asking. I'm answering you.
It's Hans, not Hans. I had it right earlier.
The D is invisible.
Okay. Felipe, new member, first post. First assignment, which was week 7 assignment. Making sure my heater wasn't on. Getting warm over here. We have a 2002 Toyota Corolla 1.8. No issues. Yellow lead is hooked up to CMP+. Black lead is the ground at the cylinder head. He's using the Triton, was asking about the Zeus, and he also has an O scope as well. So nice cam sensor signal. I don't know how many teeth this one has for the cam sensor. If it's like some of the newer ones that I was testing, like my Highlander, I think had three pulses on the cam. But this could be a single pulse. I'm not quite sure on that one. And I'm not sure if you're in the chat, and or if you joined in the live stream or not. But I appreciate you joining in and turning in some homework. Now we have Richard Cook with a 1993 Acura Integra, known good running capture. So I'm going to look where he's connected first. He's connected at the distributor. So this doesn't have a crank sensor down on the engine, on the crankshaft itself. It has a couple of sensors built in to the distributor. So we have a TDC sensor, crank sensor, and CYP. I don't know if that's a camshaft sensor.
He's in the chat.
Is he?
But he's not sure how many teeth.
Okay. Yeah, without the crankshaft, I wouldn't be able to tell how many are in there. And Toyota seems to like to vary them a lot, but it could be 4 since it's a 4-cylinder engine, and that might be why I saw 3 on each cam on my Highlander, because it's a V6, but there's 3 cylinders on each bank. So on this 93 Integra, we're hovering around 0, and we get a pulse every once in a while. Now, it's not very often, and this may only have 4 pulses for this crank sensor, and it may be there just to fire the distributor, or to tell the computer to fire the ignition coil, because this has a adjustable distributor on the back of the cylinder head. At Bob Newman, we have a 99 Chevy Cavalier. I think this is one of his own vehicles. Has used this one a couple of times. It's always nice to get all the known good waveforms you can out of your own vehicle. We have the crankshaft sensor, and he put, I believe I measured the frequency right. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have yellow is the ICM crank signal, and then it's grounded at the ICM CKP ground. So Doug would be more likely to tell us if the frequency graph is wrong when we get to that waveform. So at idle, 694 RPM, snap throttle up to 3,733 RPM. And then we see, so with the VR sensor, if you didn't see the video last week, they generate more voltage the faster the engine is going. The faster that tooth goes by that sensor, the higher the amplitude of that AC signal is. So as he revs it up, we see that big climb, and then as it slowly falls down, the amplitude is going to drop a little bit. And we'll see less gaps in the waveform here as well, because that frequency is, or the waveform comes more frequent. The frequency is higher. And we have a zoomed in picture here. So we have a double tooth here, which he used to sync up his waveform, and then a couple of single teeth, and then a double again, a couple of single teeth and a double. So he's got the 720 degree rotation here, and peak to peak is 8 volts. This is at idle. And then at 3,700 RPM, we are at a little over 30 volts. So that is quite the big jump on that sensor. Now, my question to you guys is, if some of these vehicles, if you were to rev this up to redline, if it would let you, 5,500 RPM, would this voltage be over the 40 volts that the U-scope can handle? And if so, do you need an attenuator to measure crankshaft sensors like this, or do you just not rev them up very high? I'm curious. I don't know for sure. I would probably risk it, because it's going to be very momentary, and we're looking at a difference in voltage. We're actually, from 0 up. Is that correct? 30 volts there. So peak to peak is 30 volts, but we show like negative 35 right here. I'm not quite sure on the ATS scope, but it'd be something I'd be a little leery on, and I'm not quite sure if I would use an attenuator or not. Picoscope and Snap-on, I wouldn't worry about it. ATS, definitely don't have to worry about it, since it has a 500 volt input capacity. Thank you, Bob, for that one. Now, actually on the frequency plot, I don't see the frequency. This looks like just a regular waveform view, but is it frequency? Doug may have to answer this one for us. I'm not sure. I don't see the same frequency button over here like we saw on your capture, but it could just be in a different spot. Like I said, I'm not familiar with the ATS scope, but this just looks like a zoomed out version of the waveform. The picoscope attenuator I don't think works on the U scope. The U scope doesn't have a BNC connector, so you have to convert from the banana jacks to a BNC to use the Hentech attenuator, and then back to your banana jacks after that. But it does come with one. At least the kit that I bought the deluxe kit. It came with a little attenuator, and I can't remember if it was a 40-to-1 attenuator. Daryl may be able to refresh our memory if he's still in here. It came with an AC filter and an attenuator in the kit, so it does come with it. Jump out of there. And Chad Coleman, we have a 2008 Chrysler Town and Country transmission input sensor. So not the regular crank or cam sensor like we've been used to. All the input speed sensor is going to operate quite the same, other than Chrysler has quite a few issues with their input and output speed sensors. So 2500 RPM down to idle, which was 700 RPM. So we see the amplitude is quite high over on the left side of the screen. As the RPM drops down, we drop down to a little more manageable voltage. And then he shows us a little bit zoomed in as well. So since this is a speed sensor, it's not going to have a missing tooth. The transmission is going to use this to determine all the shift points. It's going to use it to compare the engine speed to the transmission input speed and find out if that torque converter is slipping or not. And then it's going to compare the input speed to the output speed to verify which gear it's in and verify that there's no slippage in the transmission. And some of them use the output speed sensor of the transmission for the speedometer, so it'll send the signal back up to the instrument cluster for the speedometer and back to the PCM for a speed reference. So Doug says if you plot the frequency, it'll present it on the y-axis. I'll jump back to that one here in a second, because it might have said frequency down at the bottom, but I don't know if that's X or Y. So we can see here a nice clear AC signal hovering around 0 volts, or centered at 0 volts, and no missing teeth. So that was this one here. Now it does say T or frequency if FFT. I don't know the acronyms that the ATS scope uses here. Doug said he covered it up in the photo, but I'm not seeing the regular, the graph that came up like Doug's. So I'm not sure if the frequency is done properly on this one. Chris Mikos has a 99 Ford Expedition. This is a camshaft position sensor. And I'm not sure if this is on startup because we kind of sit around 0 volts and then it jumps up here. And then we have a signal that's hovering around maybe 300 millivolts is where it's centered. And I'm not sure what these little bumps are. It could just be some ignition noise. But we have our sync signal for that camshaft. And I can't remember on this one if it has, what year, 99? So this is a 2-valve Triton, and they only have the cam sensor on the one side, but I'm not sure how many teeth are on that cam sprocket. If it's 4 or if it's only 1. I know that the newer ones it seems like they have a couple teeth. And then Jira said that he failed this week's assignment. He didn't have time to get a capture, but he did have one with an ignition issue, and he shows how to check the IGF signal off of that coil. Since it doesn't apply to this week, we'll skip over that. If you guys are we'll cover this in detail in another week. But he has some good captures here that shows shows the glitch. So if we have time when we're done, we'll jump back to it. But if you guys want to read that and I don't get to it, then you can scroll down and check that out. Now, Den Bree had one. This was a 2018 Honda Accord CVT, and it had, I think this was like the CVT speed sensor, 2-wire VR sensor. We can see the reluctor and his bore scope, but he wasn't getting a good signal out of it. Now he used the picoscope and got a little bit different waveform. So he's starting at 5 volts. So I don't know if this is a VR sensor or not. I don't know if they make it a 2-wire Hall effect sensor, but it's got negative voltage but no positive voltage. And I don't know if a diode or something in the PCM could prevent our voltage from exceeding over 5 volts. I'm really not sure on this vehicle without having one in my beta test. Kind of a strange one. So Daryl says the 2-valve Tritons have a single sync reluctor on the camshaft. Hans has one, 2002 Volkswagen Jetta, vehicle speed sensor fault. The data was reporting correctly, but scoped the sensor anyways, had a funny spike when he shifted gears. Start to zoom in, the problem gets clearer and clearer. Don't know if they have the speedo drop out completely on time. Was able to check voltage average between the rulers, and it's almost half a volt lower when the issue is happening. So we can see, a lower amplitude here as he increases his speed. It starts to increase, and then when he shifted, we get this weird noise. I thought you were getting ready to say something.
No, I was yawning, sorry.
Did you forget you were mic'd up? Am I boring you, Valerie?
No, I was just resting my eyes.
I can hear you.
What?
Nothing.
Well, I can't hear you.
So, she's tuning me out. We have our AC signal. We can start to see the glitches here, but it's hard to tell how much is aliased, how much is false reporting until we really get zoomed in where the picoscope shines, because we can zoom in on that capture. Here, we do get a weird glitch, and that's kind of a strange dropout. Now, I don't know if I misread the post. Was it a faulty sensor, Hans? I mean, it seems pretty repetitive, and it's weird that it drops down to 0 volts when it's happening. Yes, a faulty sensor. And it's strange that it happened only after you shifted. But definitely weird. But if you didn't have the scope, and you're relying on scan data only, you would see a small drop in speed. But would you really know if it was the sensor or something else? Was it a bad wire? At least this way, when we're connected at the sensor, we can see that there is a dropout or a glitch. And it's just strange how it's almost like that sensor gets shorted to ground at times. Interesting. David shared one on an 06 Tacoma. 4-liter, had a P0340. I believe that's a camshaft position sensor code. And he shares, we have the crankshaft sensor here. This is once again with I think it was the USB autoscope. Is that the same one? I don't see a identification of what scope this is, but it looks like the same layout. And he also has a camshaft sensor signal here. So at 750 RPM and at 4,500 RPM. So we can see that the crankshaft sensor is no longer holding a good waveform. It's breaking up here. And our voltage doesn't look like it increased that much unless this is set to auto scale. But it looks like we're set to a 5-volt scale. So being that it's an AC sensor, I would expect to see a lot more voltage than that at the higher RPM. We see some glitches. I'm guessing that this was a bad crank sensor. We'll have to open the comments up and see if he replaced that crank. No, I don't see it here, but the vehicle was setting a camshaft sensor. That's why it's important to scope. Setting a cam sensor, but the fault was actually in the crankshaft sensor. And Kevin, sliding in at the last second. It doesn't say grand finale. It says happy Thanksgiving. Running late on this one. So we have a 99 Ford F-150 with a 5.4. It was showing cam timing issues before, and then he has an after picture once it was repaired. 2-valve engine with only one cam sensor, which is on bank 2, the driver left side of the engine. The picture will show that the timing of the cam is retarded by 20 degrees. He also has some bonus pictures of how this was calculated. Yes, but AutoZone said that I needed normally it's an oxygen sensor and then a mass airflow sensor and then a crankshaft sensor and then maybe a battery and a fuel pump. So the list goes on, but it's normally not what you really need. So this is with the bad timing. We have our missing tooth on the crankshaft sensor. We have our other VR sensor here. And when you guys are looking at these waveforms and you're comparing to a known good, always make sure that your waveform is not inverted, because sometimes people take them from the wrong wire and it'll be flipped the wrong way. But he counts how many teeth he has on the crank and which one it lines up with here. So we're at like 8.5 teeth that lines up with the low spot of our cam, and he says that it should be over here. So 360 degrees of the crank, and then did we do a math channel or did we count the teeth? We did a math. So we have the milliseconds here. So 360 degrees divided by how many milliseconds equals 5 milliseconds per degree. Battery pads with dielectric grease. And you may as well change the light bulbs and put some grease on those as well. So this is how he's calculating how far behind he is. By using the milliseconds. Now, knowing that our math for the crankshaft per degree is per millisecond is 5 degrees. The time from cursor 1 to cursor 2 is 16 milliseconds. So if we multiply those, we end up with 83 degrees. So the camshaft is 83 degrees from our timing mark on the crankshaft. Now, my math could be off. Or I may not be following. But in my head, 16 times... Oh, never mind. You're right.
You want to borrow my fingers to count on?
Yes, can I borrow your fingers? I would pull my toes up here and count on those, but I don't know if there's enough room on the screen, and you guys probably really don't want to see that. My brain's running a little sluggish today. Carry on.
Good thing we're live.
Good thing we're live. Cut. So math, step 3. So knowing from our known good crank and cam correlation, the sync of the crank to cam is approximately 6.25 teeth, which would put cursor 2 at the proper location. The time from cursor 1 to cursor 2 is 12 milliseconds. So the math now is 12 milliseconds times 5 degrees equals 62.63 degrees. So we're 20 degrees retarded in timing. And I'm just 20 degrees behind anyways. So this is a known good waveform. So this is where he... here's where I said that watch your waveform, make sure it's not inverted. So instead of going to the lowest hump here, we went to the peak right here because that waveform was flip-flopped. So you gotta look at your leading edge and your trailing edge here to make sure that you're measuring off the correct point. So just past the sixth tooth after the missing tooth. Quick glance at the math to determine proper timing. So he counts teeth in large increments. 36 teeth equals a full rotation of the crank, so 10 degrees per sprocket tooth. And we should be at 62 to 63 degrees right in here. Thank you for that, Kevin. And thank you for confusing me into doing math incorrectly. Oh, man.
Remind me, and for your next live stream, I'll set a calculator out for you.
Okay. So that is it for the...
Nope.
No? Are there more?
Daryl had a late entry, I think.
Okay, let me refresh. Daryl sliding in at the last minute. Did you? Where's it at?
I thought I saw one from him that popped up on my phone. Let me look again, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't show up on the first time. The first refresh here.
I got you, Daryl.
If it doesn't show up,
Yeah.
Get a grade.
There it is. Week 7.
Did I pass it?
CKP, CMP, B1 and B2 intake correlation.
I'm not sure why it's not showing up on my feed.
2013 Sienna 3.5.
It is showing up in the recent media.
Okay.
Okay. So 2013 Sienna 3.5 2 GRFE. So this will be the same. Is it the same? 13. This is newer, but I also use the 3.5 liter engine on my Toyota Highlander for some of the tests. So we have the CKP sensor, which is a variable reluctance. And then he also has the camshaft position sensors in here as well. And this one, just like the other Toyotas, seems to hover around 0 volts. But on the Toyotas, the negative wire for that crank sensor is typically grounded. And if the vehicle has VR sensors for the crank and the cam, normally they're all grounded at the same location. Now, Daryl, you surprised me here because we had a discussion about your 94 Toyota pickup, and I thought for sure you would be doing this test on your 94 Toyota pickup, because I almost did it on mine, and I decided that I would hold off and let you take the glory of checking that one. Now, if I missed anyone else, speak up now, because I may have missed it. It may not be showing up on my feed here.
Kevin says that he had another one too, but I think you did it, didn't you? It had the Mercedes and the Ford. It's the one where he started out saying Happy Thanksgiving weekend, or is that a different one?
That was the Ford that the cam timing was off, and then
You can also type it in the search at the top right of the group.
It's right here. Okay. So we have an 04 Mercedes C230K 1.8 liter supercharged engine, where it's doing its best to show off its intake and exhaust cams to the crankshaft of mighty power. It may be small, but it sure can pack something. Either way, they're in good harmony and ready to rock. Now, I'm not sure if this is a little newer than the ones I've worked on, but is this the one that has like the overcomplicated intake system, and it has like the two throttle bodies? One is on the intake manifold, one is on the air box to release the boost? Or am I thinking of BMW? So we have a VR sensor for the crank, we have Hall effect for the cam, and even here we can see the humps of the engine rotation. So no check engine light. So this was a known good, correct, Kevin? No running issues. Oh, I'll go back to it. There was a note on the waveform. Apparently, I need to put my glasses on. LASIK just didn't cut it for me. And then this was another one for 2006 Ford Expedition 3-valve Triton. Now this one has cam sensors on both banks, VR sensors, and that's because it's got variable valve timing on both banks, which normally fails. So this is a very common test to perform on those vehicles. So let me go back up to Daryl's. Okay. He used the tooth counter function um, on channel A. Is that the note you're talking about? Using the pico measurement for rising edge count of the crankshaft reluctor between the rulers. So here I am dropping the ball, or I didn't click on the right waveform. Um, but I have not used the tooth counter function of the picoscope. I didn't even know I had it until recently. And I think I saw it on the picoscope website when they were looking for a ABS issue. It was a UK vehicle. Now, what catches my eye on this before we talk about the tooth counter is that most of the captures we've had so far, the missing tooth waveform is actually higher in amplitude than all the other teeth. But on this one, the amplitude of that missing tooth is lower, which I find strange. I wonder why. I wonder if it is a double high tooth or if it has. Toyota normally has a, a missing tooth where it's an extra low spot. But 34 teeth between rulers. And since we have a missing tooth, does that mean that it's got 35 teeth? Because we're just counting the rising edge. And is there a threshold on this one, Daryl? When you turn this on, does it ask you what threshold you want to measure at? So Daryl says it's a 36 minus 2. And maybe that's why we see the lower amplitude here, because it's missing 2 teeth. And that's why we're seeing the extra wide spot here. Josh says he has to learn this function, so we're not just counting teeth all the time. It's set to an automatic threshold. Okay. Yeah, I haven't used that feature, so I'll have to check that one out. You may have to do a video so we can have it on a weekly waveform challenge. But then you have to have a picoscope to participate. So that may not work. Okay, did I miss anyone else? I'll scroll through here again, make sure I didn't miss any. We're still less than an hour in, so I'll go over Jira's IGF and IGT circuits really quick, because it's some good information, and I don't want you guys to have to wait until we get to that portion to learn it. So Toyotas have a IGT, which is the computer triggering the coil to fire, and then an IGF, which is the feedback from that coil telling the computer, hey, I fired. They'll normally set codes, but not always. And I can't remember if it's Toyota or Honda, but if that signal gets shorted to ground, it may not run at all. And sometimes the aftermarket coils like to short that wire to ground. So here we have an amperage waveform of the ignition coil charging up. And I believe that this here is our IGF, which is the feedback circuit. And if we zoom out here and look at multiple cylinders, we can see multiple amperage waveforms. And we see IGF, a feedback circuit here. It's normally at 5 volts, it got pulled to ground, went back up. But then this one over here is shaped a lot different from that. This one's nice and flat at the bottom. This one has a sharp taper and comes to a point. And we get over here, and this one has no feedback signal at all. And then we get over here, and then it has a regular signal. And then down here at the bottom, this yellow trace is the trigger signal, probably for this cylinder, which is probably number 1. If I would have read the notes, I would know that for sure. But he had cylinder 4 and 5 picked up issues with the scope. Now, I don't know if I had codes for both, but I suspect that the one that's missing the signal completely would set a code, but the other one that's about ready to fail probably wouldn't set a code. So that's a good indication, when you're doing this test, to say, hey, we need to do at least 2 coils, but now might be the time to do at least 3. Do at least 3 new ones underneath the intake manifold, so you don't have to go back in there later, and then put 3 of the ones that are still good out on the other bank that's easily accessible. And then he had a fuel pump mixture here. We have an alternator that was charging but had slightly high ripple, and then a fuel pump that had a burnt pin due to improper installation, and a head gasket leak on a Tacoma. So we got quite a few waveforms here. Hopefully I can identify them. This one here looks like it could be alternator or fuel pump. Where's our measurements here? So he has AC coupling on here. Um, and our ripple showing, making sure our maximum shows 144, but our delta between our two measuring points is only 50 millivolts. So I'm not sure if that's the AC ripple or not, unless this was the beforehand. This waveform definitely looks a lot dirtier, but I'm not sure. And we're at the same scaling, so that could be the alternator. And we were at 129, which most battery testers would still pass that. But it could have been causing some flickering as well. So here this is probably the fuel pump one, or it could still be the alternator. We have 14 volts, so this one looks like it's charging, so this is probably the alternator. And now we're down to 69 millivolts of ripple. And then, is this a fuel pump one? Power to fuel pump, ground from fuel pump, duty cycle to the fuel pump control module from the ECM. And then signal DI to the ECM, so that fuel pump control module may send a signal back to the ECM. Where's our? Do we have an amperage? Power to the fuel pump, ground. So we have power, we have ground, but maybe he wasn't seeing pressure. And then here we have the head gasket leak issue. Cranking it over, he's probably using a pulse sensor in the radiator, and he's getting a peak right here as one of these cylinders comes up on compression stroke or fires. We get a peak in the cooling system. And then I can't quite zoom in enough on that one, but I'm guessing he has a pin fitment issue in this connector. Okay, I'll refresh one more time, make sure that there's no more that pops up. And then I guess, do you guys have any questions for me on the assignment so far? I like to cover it every week, even though you guys normally don't have any questions. Normally you put them in the group and we get them solved either by myself or somebody else. Normally someone else beats me to it. I appreciate you guys chiming in and helping out some fellow technicians. But if you guys have any questions for me, now would be the time to to let me know. If you guys want to do something different, if you have a certain test that you want me to cover, all that stuff, you can either say it in the live stream or put it in the group chat, and I'll put it on the roster of videos. I do have the video edited on time and uploaded for tomorrow, and all of you guys will have probably no problem handling tomorrow's video, because we're continuing to build on what we've been doing, and you shouldn't have an issue. Tomorrow will require a 2-channel lab scope. Thank you for that, Angel. Valerie, is there anything else that I missed?
Yes. I don't know if he's in here or not, but happy birthday to Brian Good.
Happy birthday, Brian Good. So was it today or was it on Thanksgiving?
It was on Thanksgiving.
Happy belated birthday, Brian Good.
And then also, we never came to an end of discussion on it. But there was that special thing you were thinking of doing for next week's live stream, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to say it, and if not, then just forget what I said.
So we've been playing around with the idea of bringing guests on to our live stream to talk about their waveform captures. I haven't figured out the logistics of it or how we're going to use it or what software we're going to use. More than likely it's going to be Zoom or StreamYard. I don't know if the quality of StreamYard, if the paid version has better quality. I'll have to check into that. Jason says t-shirt giveaway, but I want to keep this t-shirt. I only have 2 of them.
They want an ugly sweatshirt giveaway.
An ugly sweatshirt giveaway. Unfortunately, I did not find a new sweatshirt to wear for this week's video. So that's something we've kind of been talking about, is making it even more interactive than we are, and we'll once I pull up your waveform, you guys can come on if you want to, or if you have specific thoughts on a certain test and you want to discuss it, then you guys can come in and talk about it. Only with pockets. We need a sweater with a pocket. Or I think we need a sweater with a big pocket. It's more like a pouch. You can put all your tools in there.
A scope pocket.
I don't think I've seen Corey in here from S&A Auto, but he was upset because the shirt that I gave him at Super Saturday last year didn't have a pocket on it. he says shirts have to have a pocket, but I've seen him wearing it in Facebook posts quite a bit. A t-shirt with pockets only. Otherwise, it's a rag.
I guess we know what Kuba did with her shirt. Did you give her a shirt?
So
it's a rag now.
My shirt is now a rag, according to Kuba, because Kuba got a t-shirt as well.
I'm telling Santa Claus.
Josh says Zoom works better, and that's what they use for the Kia virtual meetings. So I'll check that one out. And we'll see if we can get that lined up. Hopefully I can. I'll have to figure it out because I've normally only been on the participant side of Zoom, and I've never been the host or the operator.
We can practice ahead of time.
But will we? Will we practice ahead of time?
No, but there's the option that we could.
We'll practice it like at least 5 minutes before we start the live stream.
But how are you going to do it?
I
mean, if nobody's even interested, some people are kind of shy when it comes to being live on the YouTubes.
So if I get it arranged and I figure out how to use it, I'll put up a post in the group. You guys can chime in. If you want to be on screen, then we'll just discuss it in the Facebook group.
Yeah, you could also just be a voice like me. If you want to just hang out in your jams and be a voice in the background, that's okay.
You can do that also. There'll be a few rules. No profanity. What else is there? If you're on video, you probably have to have clothes on, I'm assuming. I don't know how. YouTube already flagged a bunch of my live streams for
drinking a beer.
I'm not sure what.
One of them was even a non-alcoholic beer.
So yeah, I think it'll be fun. I'll put a post up in the Facebook group if we get it figured out, and then Josh says on Zoom you can do just the audio. So if you guys don't want to be on video, I know that jumping in on video live on YouTube is a lot of pressure. If you want to do just the audio, it'll be like you guys are just calling in, and you'll just have to mute your YouTube feed. Otherwise, we'll get like this weird feedback thing. But then you can discuss. It'll be like you're talking to me on the phone, and we'll just discuss it. But yeah, that's something we've been talking about. We'll try to do it for next week. Hopefully we can make that happen. And if we do, then I'll post it up in the group, and I'll try to post it up on Friday to find out who's interested in joining, and then we'll make some arrangements to get you guys joined in. And then was it that tiny can? Was it a can?
Well, there was that stream you did a long time ago where you're drinking like the world's tiniest Pepsi, and somebody was making fun of you for drinking a beer.
They are a small Pepsi, but my hand size makes it look even tinier. It looks like, that little bottle that kids have with their little doll that has the milk that disappears when you turn it upside down. But it was an 8-ounce can of soda.
Yeah, I don't think people understand how big your hands are. I'm going to give them something so they can get a visual of this. Hold on a second. Let me go grab something.
I have a really hard time with gloves. I also have a extremely large head. My cranium is oversized. I have to wear a 2XL or 3XL, depending on the brand, motorcycle helmet when I actually rode.
Okay.
You know what they say about big hands? Yeah, it's hard to find gloves that fit.
So this is a regular sized kitchen dinner plate, and this is how big it is compared to Chad's hand.
Oh, okay, she's fooling you guys here.
No,
Okay, regular cup of water,
It's not a
So,
cup.
or cup, not a cup, bottle of water. Yeah, it's very difficult to find gloves that fits. That's the worst part about it. And my hands don't fit in those tiny little spots on the import vehicles. But it seems like all vehicles are hard to work on nowadays. So I just normally end up with slices all up and down my arms. That's all the hand you got. Well, Daryl, I work with what I got.
Heyo.
Um, so if we make it happen and you guys do want to participate, then try to have a capture in mind so that I can make sure to pull you guys up on screen when I have that capture on the screen. And I'll let you do the talking about it and let you explain it. And then I don't have to stumble all over it. Perhaps Kevin can explain some math, since I seem to be having a difficult time calculating simple math equations in my head, even approximation. Valerie's making fun of me over there. Anything else? Or should we leave it on this weird, awkward note?
Pico would appreciate an awkward outro. I know that.
Pico would appreciate an awkward outro.
Are you still in here, Pico? We're going to make it real awkward just for you.
Snap-on size 10 plus gloves. Yeah, and they always give you those free pairs of socks like around the holidays, and they're always the large ones, and they like come halfway across my foot. I need the XL Snap-on socks.
Wait, did you say those were free socks?
Sometimes.
The ones that you always give me? And you're like, hey, I got you something.
Depending on what color they are, sometimes I have to buy them.
Mm.
And just like a Snap-on jacket. It might be free at the time, but you normally have to buy something expensive to get it. A Pico 4425 hand comparison. I don't have a 4425. I have a 4423, so no, it's like ancient stuff. Busted. Dang it. Shouldn't have said anything about the free socks. Well, when you ordered your new socks, did you order them on my account or your account?
My account.
Okay. Okay, I think we'll wrap this one up. Thank you guys for joining us. I hope to see you next week. The other video will come out tomorrow morning. You guys are already on the right track to be able to complete tomorrow's video. You won't have any issue at all. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post it on YouTube or in the Facebook group. Joshua says he bought another electric ratchet to get his free socks. It's actually a ratchet sleeve to keep the scratches off the ratchet. And on that note, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.
Bye.